Okay, welcome this evening to, sorry about my door slamming there. Welcome this evening to IAMAS's April 2022 VVA talk. VVA talks are voices, visions, and advocacy, and we hold that as a core value to our organization, as a means of giving space to conversations that oftentimes aren't held in a way that centers mothers. And so tonight's talk is on reproductive justice and the ways that it impacts mothers, both from the side of advocacy, but also those that are impacted by policy and the other factors that may be involved. So tonight's talk is hosted by Dr. Haile Eshe Cole, and she will be joined by Darlene and Kellee, who are going to be offering their very solid experience in both on the advocacy side, but also the academic side, which again, as part of our organization, we value both, and we want to have both be part of this conversation. So Eshe is going to start us off with a few questions for our panel, and we're hoping to have this be a very informal talk. But on the other hand, I hope as you're listening that you're thinking a little bit about what questions you want to ask to the folks in this space, because there is the Q&A button. If you're on a typical computer, it's on the bottom of your screen. Sometimes if you have your iPhone or a different type of phone, you may have to hit the more button on the bottom of what's showing as the screen, and that will get you into the Q&A function. Otherwise, you can just use the chat box, as most of us have been doing with the Zoom functioning over the past few years. And I think many of us are familiar with that. So we'll be fielding questions through both, and we hope that you come with good input. It can be comments, it could be questions, and anything else. But with no further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Haile Eshe Cole. Thanks.
Thanks, Katie, so much. So welcome, everyone. I'm super excited to be here. I think we're going to have a really interesting and awesome conversation. But we'll start with some brief intros, and then we'll go through a couple of questions that I have. You know, we're hoping it will be pretty laid back and just interesting. And yeah, so I'm really excited. I'll share a little bit about myself. Like, as Katie said, I'm Dr. Haile Eshe Cole. What about me? Done a lot of organizing work over the years around reproductive health and justice, research on maternal and infant health disparities, some teaching on the topics at various colleges and universities. And so I'm super excited to be a part of this conversation today. And I'm joined with Darlene and Kellee, who are beautiful ladies who I love very much. I've done some work with them personally, and they've got some really amazing experiences to share. So I want to start by letting them share a little bit about themselves. So who would like to kick it off? Darlene or Kellee, to tell us a little bit about themselves before we jump into the questions.
I'll let Darlene go first.
All right. My name is Darlene Turner, and I am a physician assistant by training, but really have done the bulk of my work for the last 10 plus 15 or whatever years in community-based doula work. And so started by providing direct services, and then just really was just dumbfounded by the disparities in birth outcomes for Black women, and just have really in the last decade really just dedicated myself to we have to fix this. I do minor bits of organizing, but my work focuses mostly on increasing the number of Black birth workers. So I write curriculum, I train doulas, I'm working on getting more people to be community health workers, doulas, lactation consultants, and midwives, because we know the midwives model of care is actually a very effective model for Black and brown women. It's one that's highly replicable, get it right, replicable, so that one of my goals is to have people train within 2 to 3 years, and then we can have folks out in the field really quickly, especially to rural and underserved areas, and training people from those areas so that they are serving their communities, because they best. You know, I look at different HRSA grants and things, and they're like, we will pay doctors to go work there. And I'm like, why? They don't want to go there. And they're only going to go there for 2 years, get their loans paid off, and then they're going to leave. And the community still stays underserved. Whereas if you invest in the community, in the people actually living there and raising their families there and giving people a way to earn a living wage, then that community, not only are the moms and babies going to do well, but the communities are going to do better because people can thrive. They have a way to support themselves and care for themselves. And, you know, it's an uphill battle, but that is where, you know, my work focuses right now.
All right. So that's actually where I met Miss Darlene, was at the Amnesty International conversation when they were the deadly delivery report.
Deliveries,
And I think I was on a panel or something, and I learned a lot you know, talking with you that day. Esha, you remember that?
that was like, I think that was even pre my son. He's like 16 now.
Yeah, it was a long
So,
time ago.
that's a long time ago. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, but the way that I got into this was really because I was a mom who had not a great experience with my birth, and I was also with other mothers, you know, on Medicaid, food stamps, and having to navigate those systems, you know, living in affordable housing, and you know, that kind of thing. And we were having very similar experiences. This group of women that I began to build relationships with, and we started to build an analysis together and push on the structures and systems that we felt like weren't serving us. Because I mean, there are a lot of people in our communities thinking that they're helping when they're actually causing a lot of harm. And not giving us, you know, what we need. And I think it speaks to sort of this looking at us as needy, right, instead of powerful, and you know, how all that works. And then that's also how I met Eshe, Dr. Cole, right? When I met her, she was Eshe. And baby Nia, you know, I had Yuri when I met you, and you know, we were introduced to you because you know, you and Sade, because we were out there pushing and cutting up, and I felt like when you came to be a part of the group, you fit right in with us. So yeah, the work that I've done has been mostly, I mean, I've provided care before and birth support before as a doula, but I'm not built for that. Those are magical people, I think, that that do that work. I'm more interested in organizing, community organizing, and you know, different strategies for social change, and like what we can build together, because the thing that we have now ain't working. So
that right there.
Well, thank you both for that. Y'all have hit on so many things that I hope that we get to dig a little bit deeper into as the conversation goes on. But I want to take a step back and kind of build this conversation from the base. So we're going to talk about maternal health disparities. I think that's part of what brought us here and what we're really passionate about, and the work that, you know, brought us together in the beginning. But, you know, this is the theme for this talk is, you know, reproductive justice. And so I would love to hear kind of what that means to the both of you. And, you know, for folks who may be on the call who don't know, you know, reproductive justice, the concept was started by Black women. Hey, beautiful.
Oh my God, look how big she is.
I know, and beautiful.
All grown up.
So, you know, we know that reproductive justice was started by Black women, and at its root, you know, the kind of broad definition for reproductive justice is, you know, the right to have a child, the right to not have a child, and also to parent and say in a safe community, right? So that's kind of like the basic definition. But then, you know, for those who might be more versed in reproductive justice, we think about kind of some of the things put forth by Loretta Ross and her books on reproductive justice. And she talks about it also as a framework for understanding power. And so, and we think about, you know, the right to have a child or not, the right to parent in safe communities, but also this issue of power. Like, what does that mean to you in the context of this conversation? And Kellee, why don't we start with you? How are you with that question?
So I think that the work that helped to create reproductive justice was labored by Black folks, Black women, and I think there is a legacy, right, that we need to remember when we think about this. I think the term, unfortunately, I think it's sort of co-opted and robbed of that a lot of times. And you know, thinking about what's happening right now, right? The Texas woman that was arrested and indicted, I think, by the district attorney, one of the district attorneys in Texas, you know, really, I think speaks to like this question around, you know, it being bigger than just abortion rights, right? Because it's like, whose bodies are surveilled, right? Who is able to have children and not worry about them being murdered in the street by the police, you know? It's not everyone, right? That's a very specific issue that I think is connected to Black women and other, or Black people and other people of color. And anytime that we sort of buck, right, we get sort of pushed back in line. And I think this is a time when, you know, that, and historically, I guess, right, looking at the history of it all, you know, it's always been one or the other, right? Like we've never thought about, I don't think holistically until this. This really, I think, asks us to think about reproductive health and people holistically. And I don't think that was ever really a thing before. I think it was like either you're on the abortion work or you're doing birth work, and you can't think about both. And reproductive justice, I think, gives us a framework to really think about it. So things like housing is reproductive justice, things like, you know, food security, you know, anti-militarism work, right? Union organizing, all of that is housing is about reproductive justice at the end of the day, I think. So I talked a lot.
No, it was great. Darlene, you want to add to that? What does that mean to you, reproductive justice?
On the one hand, when I think about it, it's freedom, but it's also privacy. And that's the thing, that's something that has really struck me. I've been teaching, you know, a lot of doulas lately, and I've been, you know, going over HIPAA, and, you know, you don't speak about people's business. And, you know, when you're somewhere, make sure that you have documents and things closed, that your computer's closed, so someone else can't read whatever you're writing about your client. And, you know, I think about all these things, like just even with COVID, I thought it was so interesting. People were having a fit about a vaccine. And I'm like, really? You know, whether you do what was really at the crux of it. And it was so interesting to me that people couldn't make the connection. Like, you can't tell me what to do. And I'm like, y'all been trying to tell us what to do, like ad nauseum. And I'm always confused, if you will, like, how do people know if women are getting contraception or an abortion? So if HIPAA truly exists and it is a privacy act, then how does anybody know? You know, and I'm always asking this question because, you know, it's such a huge thing in practice, But if truly HIPAA's working, then nobody should know who's having an abortion, who's getting contraception, who's having babies, not having babies, you know. So I think in addition, it is power, it's autonomy, but it's also an issue of privacy. Like, you know, I'm not asking people how much insulin they're taking. So why are you asking me about this? But again, it comes back to, like Kellee was saying, when we're talking about issues of housing and food stamps and other services, when you're in that system, our broader system says you have no rights, you have no privacy. And we have the right to police you about how many children you're having, and you can't have more than this because we're paying for it. And that's the dynamic that I think we really have to get to the nuts and bolts of. But I also see in the work that I'm doing is this is kind of this perpetuating thing. And whenever I say, well, you know, you should pay doulas and midwives, well, we can't pay them as much as doctors. I'm like, if they caught the baby, you should. I mean, it's that simple. If they attended the birth and caught the baby, then that person gets the money. But it's a whole system of keeping kind of an underbelly. And it's really, it would be interesting if it weren't tragically criminal, in my opinion.
Yeah, you know, Darlene, while you were talking, a couple of things were coming to mind. You know, I feel like when we think about systems and things like privacy or even like HIPAA and things like that, I think that these are, I keep wanting to say the word like residues, but they're kind of evidence of this, of these actually bigger systems and underlying issues, right? So if you're talking about privacy, right, which I think comes into the debate around abortion and health all the time, but I think what we're really talking about is when kind of not even the question of like who is able to have a private life or not, but a question of kind of like, why do these systems feel that it's important to keep tabs on these types of like, what are the words am I trying to say? Why is it important for these systems? Why do they make it their business to monitor these aspects of people's life, right? We have to really think about that. And I think it ties to kind of what Kellee was talking about, and it ties a lot to, you know, if we think about history and we think about Black and brown bodies in particular, I mean, we're talking about kind of like the management of bodies and kind of like, why is that so important, right? Like, why is that critical? Why, you know, why is it important to be managing these Black and brown bodies? And we can look at story about the various ways in which like that's been central to this maintenance of like power. I see someone in the chat wrote the maintenance of like white supremacy, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's important for us to, as we see things, like when we talk about like privacy or like these other things, like these are important, but we have to make sure we're able to make the connections between kind of like the history and the foundations of kind of like systemic inequity and like why that's happening. So that was what was coming to mind for me as you
yeah, for me too. I mean, I'm thinking like, you know, we do this workshop called Embodied Her Stories, and we do this timeline. And in the timeline, it's like really about race, reproduction, and production, right? And labor, and whose bodies, who was valuable, right? Literally like creating, you know, workers and chattel from us, right? When we think about Black women, right? When we think about how we participate even in capitalism, considering our relationship to it, right? In the start of it, it's weird. And I think that it just plays out even more and more. And I think that's why class don't save Black women when it comes to birth. It don't protect you. It don't save you. And I always think that's an interesting conversation. Other women of color either. I mean, Black women are doing, as far as outcomes, right, are doing worse, but white women ain't doing that great in the United States when it comes to birth outcomes either. So it, you know, it's a thing.
So that's a perfect segue, I think, to the next kind of piece of the conversation, Kellee. And so, you know, we're talking about a number of like really big kind of concepts and ideas. And I don't even like saying that because this is real life, right? These aren't like abstract things, like they have real repercussions for people's lived experience, right? But so, you know, now that we've kind of laid that groundwork the best we can, right, in the time that we have, how do we connect that to what you're talking about, Kellee? So like maternal and infant health disparities and outcomes, right? So, you know, I feel like we got to really break it down. You know, there might be folks here who maybe aren't as familiar with the statistics. You were talking about class. Somebody might be like, what's she talking about, right? So, you know, for folks who don't know, you know, just a quick rundown, we know that Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die during childbirth compared to their white counterparts. We know that Black babies are 2.5 times. I mean, the last time I checked, that statistic
it's gotten worse.
Yeah, I was about to say, I feel like over the last like year or two with COVID and everything, it's actually gotten worse, right? So we see these huge disparities in maternal mortality and infant mortality. And what I was going to say is like 2.5 times more likely to die before their first birthday, right? Like kind of like the primary measure for infant mortality, but also these egregious kind of like low birth weight rates and preterm birth. You know, there are these huge racial disparities, right? And so I would love for you both to talk to me a little bit about these systems of power and these histories that we've kind of been touching on. You know, how do they tie to what's going on with maternal and infant health disparities? So we have these statistics, you know, Kellee, I know you've been doing a lot of organizing work around this issue, research too. So talk to us a little bit about why. So some people might be familiar with the research, but can you kick us off a little bit to kind of break it down for us about why?
The reason why I said that money doesn't save us is because Black women with a PhD are still more likely to have a negative outcome, versus a white woman with a GED. And you know, that's a statistic that's been around, right? And I remember when we were working with the city around in Austin around this stuff with MyOp in the 1115 waiver, they weren't interested in the moms, in the birthing people, right? They were interested only if we talked about the babies, right? And the issue is really, it's really both and, but you know, to have a healthy baby, you have to have a healthy pregnant person. And so I just, you know, thinking about that statistic and looking at, you know, the research that, and Esha can probably name the studies, but the work that you know, really looked at class difference and educational difference and the whole nine, that doesn't protect us. It actually, for Black women, exposes you to more white supremacy, if anything, and you're further away from your people at that point, right? The more educated we get. And it speaks to what I think what you were talking about earlier in the question before, the further we get away from our folks and the more we get exposed to these institutions, they were built like that. They were, I mean, the history, every single system, really, institution, not institution, but every single system in this country, in the United States, was built by and for white folks, you know, and it don't even work and serve them all the time. It definitely wasn't. It was like, I don't want to talk like a well-known professor and get into to Black death, but like that's what it's built on. That's what it's built on, you know, and Indigenous people's deaths as well, right? So why do we expect to have something different, right? You know, it's to me, it makes sense because it's in the sauce, right? It's like, you know, you can't, once you mix it in there, you know, it's hard to root it out. So I think the question is really like, how do we get what we need? How do we build something different? And it's not new either, because I think, they didn't want us in their hospitals, right? And we were caring for each other for a really long time. And this is something too that I see in the that Paula always brings up in the workshop with the timeline, is that at the same time Ina May was building the farm, right around the same time, and like white women were like taking back their births, right, and spiritual midwifery and all that. They were sanitizing the grand midwives and the parteras, right, and parteras, and doing all of that, and we lost a lot of the wisdom, and we're losing, we've lost a lot of those midwives too. I can't hear you.
Yeah, the aging.
So I feel like there's a lot there, and also thinking about how the insurance works, insurance itself, like as a system, and how we pay the medical system to keep us sick, really. I mean, we pay per procedure. So, it'd be different, I think, if we were able to post health outcomes, right? Birth outcomes by doctor, by physician, right? By hospital. What would that look like?
Ooh, sorry.
Right? What would it look like for any chronic illness in a community, for the public hospitals or any hospital that gets public dollars, right? To be transparent about what they doing and who they caring for. Because y'all know in our community, we got them, right? We don't want to go to that one. Take us to the other one because people die over there, or they call CPS on us at that hospital, right? Like we know, I mean, if you got community, and when I say community, I mean like with a little c, they will tell you what's really happening to folks. And I'm in the United States context, but I feel like, this is something that looking at Tion Parker Dominguez's work, it's something that's worldwide, right?
And there's a lot of anti-blackness, like globally. I was really like, whoa. I used to think it was mostly here, and then it's like, oh wait, it's over here, and here.
Right.
I mean, yeah, it's staggering. And Kelly's right. We were only afforded care as much as it kept us alive and healthy to bear children to make master money. So that's like the extent of our health care, what it was originally, such as it was for us. I think it's interesting, and anytime we figure out, because we constantly, Black and brown people constantly figure out how to take care of ourselves. That's why I'm saying we don't need people to come in and tell us how to do it. Just give us the resources and we'll handle it. But anytime we do that, it gets destroyed, because I always think of Black Wall Street. There were, what was it, Holy Cross Hospital in Austin. There have been places where Black people have thrived and done well, and we were having good outcomes. And it's like, oh wait, can't have that. Here come the torches, and it's a real situation of, like Kellee says, it was always designed that we were to be an underclass, but we keep kind of rising up, and they're like, dang, they keep coming back. But we just keep coming back. It's like, nah, not today. But it's a real, it's something that goes all the way back. People talk about, the Great American Experiment. Well, that really wasn't including us, because in the Constitution, they were only counting us as 3/5 of a person, and that's so that the Southern states could have more people and have more leverage. I mean, we weren't supposed to be counted. It was not, equality under God, except for them folks.
So I have so many thoughts right now. You both have touched on a lot of things. And there was a couple of things that I wanted to kind of go back to and just kind of clarify, right? Just for in case folks aren't familiar with what some of the things that we've mentioned, right? So I think first of all, Kellee, you were sharing something, sharing about the root causes of maternal and infant health disparity. And you shared some really great statistics about class, right? And so, just to reiterate, what the research has found is that when you control for not only class, but when you control for behavior, smoking, drinking, prenatal care, all of those things, none of that matters, right? We still have these horrible outcomes.
And actually, right, like Black women go and get prenatal care and we don't have better outcomes for it, right? So there's something in there, right?
Right. And so, that's really important because people ask that question. They're like, oh, why is this happening? Is it because they're not getting prenatal care? Is it because, they're not exercising, or because there are food deserts and they're not eating well? And we know, like you said, a Black woman with a PhD with insurance who's walking and eating organic food is still more likely to have these negative outcomes, and there is research, that, you were touching on, where as a Black woman actually becomes more educated and becomes more financially stable, their outcomes worsen as they move up. So that, the things that Kellee is talking about have been documented in the research. And, one of the things that I was hoping you would talk about was the allostatic load.
Yes.
Right. So, and at this point, you would think that like people are really aware about the research. But, really.
Toss in there though. I mean, allostatic load and everything else, but what's still most fascinating to me is when Black women come to this country from somewhere else, their outcomes are like white women's one generation, and their children's outcomes are like American Black women outcomes. It's here. It is. And, it is the oppression, depression, all of that is here, that is acting on us and wearing on our bodies, that's doing it. So it doesn't matter how much education, how much money and everything else. It's living here as a Black woman that is causing this. And people are still like, but it's your weight. It's living here, listening to you, now living here in this country as a Black woman with all that entails, that is making our birth outcomes what they are.
I think it's the US and the Caribbean, right? Black women who are born, and then they looked at Latinas as well, who are born in Latin America versus here, and there's a similar
pattern happening. Before we move on, Kellee, I wonder if you want to do something for me too. Do you want to define quickly the allostatic load and what that means in case people aren't familiar with that term?
Sure. The allostatic load is I've heard Dr. Kamara Jones call it weathering. It's like revving the engine of an old car. It's whenever your nervous system and your organ systems, all of your body is responding and staying, right? Allostasis is just like staying fight or flight mode. And we're not supposed to live that way, right? I think Dr. Jones also says that, when Black people go to sleep at night, or there's a study about when Black folks go to bed at night, their blood pressure stays up. But when white folks go to bed, right, their blood pressure, or other people even, their blood pressure goes down. And so that's also connected to the allostatic load or chronic stress, right? Everyone has stress, but what does it mean to be a woman in the United States, or in Austin or in Connecticut, right? What does it mean to be a trans person or a queer person? And what does it mean to be a Black trans person, right? All of that sort of, and then, if that's who you are, and that's, you can't, there's really not anything you can do about that. You're like a fish in water. So it's hard to identify that, right? And then we, as as birthing people, you feel like it's your fault, right? It's isolating, I think, which is why I really liked some of the models that I've seen, like the maternal justice model, and also the work that the National Perinatal Task Force folks are doing, that, you know, looks at bringing people together, and you know, and really sort of, I felt like at Mama Sana, we would just love people into, you know, just love on them until we knew we knew that we were building these protective factors that would help support better outcomes, right? But people have to go home, you know, and live in this society and live in this world. And I mean, you know, there are studies that show when there's police violence in a neighborhood, or violence period, that impacts birth outcomes, specifically for Black women and other women of color, right? There's gentrification, all of it, right? Impacts how healthy your baby can be, you know? And it's Dr. Lou, right? He's like, you know, it's a life course. You know, you have to look at it from the time that, like my daughter that y'all just saw, right? She's 18. What's gonna happen, right? You know, she's scared because she knows about this stuff. Even her knowing about this is bad for her health.
Yeah, absolutely. And it, you know, it ties to what you were saying, Darlene, right? So allostatic load, this condition of chronic stress, right? And Darlene cited the research about folks, you know, coming to the country and having, you know, outcomes on par with white women. And after one generation of living in this country, the outcomes being, you know, these disparities existing. And so, you know, just to be clear, make sure people understand allostatic load, it's not just chronic stress, but it's chronic stress from the experience of racism in the United States that's weathering your body, right? And impacting your ability to have positive and good birth outcomes, right? So I just want to make sure that's clear. You know, we want people who maybe this is new or whatever to fully understand like what we're talking about, you know.
But you get a lot of pushback though from the medical community around that. I remember having a conversation at the Dell Medical School here in Austin, Texas. A student was, you know, or they were a resident, was like, well, the body is full of black boxes, right? Like in an airplane, you know, it's full of black boxes. We don't always know. And I mean, people actually think that science isn't biased, right? Or that it can't be biased, or like, you know, and people don't get taught this stuff in school. Like they don't learn the history of Miriam Sims. They don't learn that, you know, what happened to how gynecology was built and who it was built on, right? That's not a everyday thing. And so, you know, having to like persuade some of these people. I mean, there's still things, I still remember that thing that came out of that ACOG book, Eshe, that you found that, you know, had some, I thought, questionable sort of conclusions around whether Black women in general were healthy enough to have natural births. And this is something that I've heard from other physicians, right? From other OBs. And also, you know, not just that, but, you know, either you're blaming Black women for their outcomes, right? And there's something inherently wrong with Black people and Black bodies, or there's something to this history stuff, right? There might be something to that. So I try to push and make people choose, right, how to think about it. But, you know, people don't want to hear that racism is impacting this, or capitalism, racial capitalism is the issue, right? Because somebody making money off this stuff. That's why, straight up.
There's the financial piece of it, but I also feel like when we're at I mean, I'm not really on the front lines anymore, but you know, when you're talking to doctors and you're talking about structural and systemic change, when you're like, well, racism is the issue, then the response is kind of like, well, what am I supposed to do about that? Like, how do I, that's a big issue. Like, how do I fix that? I'm trying to save these babies. Well, it's like, well, if you want to save the babies, you got to address, And so I feel like it's hard for people to imagine, I feel like people are solution oriented, or that's what they claim to be, right? But when it's brought to your attention that it's like, racism and history and all of these things, it's kind of like, well, what am I supposed to do about that, right? And so they kind of shuts down in that respect.
But sometimes that's sometimes. See, I've been, as I'm teaching more, and this is the perspective that I teach my students, and so I'm always kind of like, who am I going to get blowback from? But the thing that people, and I just heard it recently in a talk, Deborah Bingham with US Lactation said, it's very hard for people to really understand, like, you may be the problem, you are causing harm. And our whole nation is going through that right now. We're not going to teach critical race theory. I don't want my children feeling bad. I'm like, I don't want mine feeling bad either. You don't seem to give a crap about that. You're real good about teaching about, police brutality. If you just follow the rules, you're not going to get shot. Well, that's not quite true. But the until we can get, like Kamara Phyllis Jones says it so well, it is not race, it is racism. It is the reaction to what you see when you see my face. When you see this brown, before your eye can blink, you have formulated an opinion. And as a physician or healthcare provider, that's already started a cascade of how you're going to treat me. You have not laid hands on me. You are barely in the door, but before you can blink, you see brown and it's like, oh, she this or she, and we all do it. We all have our biases, but this particular flavor of biases, as we may want to say, is killing us. And that's the long and the short of it. And until we can, as a culture, society, or however you want to say it, folks have to admit what we learn, what we teach, and how we are is killing people. Plain and simple. And folks are just not ready to go there. You hear people, well, slavery happened. So I have to feel bad for what my grandfather did. No, but you can change the structure that it's still doing. But we don't want to talk about that because wait a minute, you hear people like, oh, it's affirmative action. No, maybe you're just really not that good. Yeah.
First of all, affirmative action benefits white women way more than anybody else. And
but, people want to complain about it, and it's like, but until this nation, and in particular the white folks in this nation, can own the fact that how this nation was set up, how it was structured, and how it continues to run, continues to harm non-white people, we're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah,
it's just that simple.
I also think though too that white folks have skin in the game, and they need to know, right? They need to understand their skin in the game, right? I think that's the biggest. A lot of this stuff is that they, because it ain't good for them either, right? Like it ain't good for y'all either. And if we center the people who are the most impacted, it's gonna lift all of us, right? And so, but it's this refusal, and even I feel like we buy into it too, right? This sort of collective amnesia. Paula always says that collective amnesia that we walk around with, that people don't want to have those conversations, but we have to force it, right? And there is no quick fix. That's the People's Institute said that, right? That's a principle of their work, is there is no quick fix, and we have to struggle together in order to figure this out. And so, of course, somebody who's making, $1 million a year, right? Or $500,000 a year, whatever, and they ain't got to be accountable for what's happening to babies and birthing people, why would they stop that? You know, what's the incentive? That's why I'm like, people making money off of this. I had there's a large foundation that's connected, you know, hospitals usually have their foundations, and you know, where do they get the money to gift that, to sort of wash that money, right? Are these $1 million babies and elective procedures? That's where they make their money, straight up. So, you know, it's built in, right? And when you start talking about messing with people's money, like they didn't shoot Dr. King because he wanted to bring people together. They shot him when he started talking about communism in Vietnam and all that, right? Like, I think it's the same thing, is that you know, we have to get buy-in, I think, from white folks to understand that they're impacted by this too. And, you know, racism dehumanizes them in a different way, right? The relationship to the oppressor. I don't want to be nobody's oppressor, you know? And are you okay with that? Y'all all right with that? I don't want that. And I don't know, that was a rhetorical question. I'm just saying.
So
I don't want that.
So I'm curious, like, and I want to leave time for questions. There's a couple more things I want to get to. You know, I feel like a lot of what you're bringing up is really deep and really complex and really important to understand. I also feel like storytelling is really important for us to understand. So we're talking about these statistics and these systems and things like that. But as I mentioned before, like, these things impact people's lived experience. And I'm pretty sure that each one of us could tell our own stories of how we've personally been impacted. And so although we know that it's not prenatal care and it's not that's really impacting outcomes, I feel like there's an importance to kind of sharing what birthing people are going through. And so I actually would like to start with Darlene on this one, because, you know, you are teaching, but although Kellee and I have also supported folks as well, and that's like what you've been doing for a really long time, what you're actively doing. So I'd love to hear kind of, how is this playing out for birthing people, like in the day to day? Like, what are you seeing when you're supporting people? Like, what's happening? Because I think that's important for people to hear as well. And Kellee, of course, like, you know, we was doing it too, you know, practicing, you know, as doulas and things like that. We've seen some things ourselves. So of course, feel free to jump in, but I want to start this one with Darlene. And I think it'll be important for us to kind of hear these stories before y'all have already been talking about solutions, but before we kind of end with kind of like what people are doing and, you know, to address the issue. But let's hear a little bit about what you're seeing.
I mean, and it's gotten really interesting with COVID. Let me just start with that, because that has added a whole other dimension to what's going on with people. When the pandemic first started, the first thing hospitals did was, okay, nobody can come in the hospital. And if you're a birthing person, you can come in, no partner, no doula, no nobody. Now we know that Black and brown women are not well listened to in the first place. So now you're going to put her in a room by herself and just assume it's all is going to be well. It was a hot mess. It was insane. And thankfully, a lot of folks just were like, this cannot stand. And it took a few months, but you know, we got it turned around, and then it was like, well, you can have one person. So how's the person supposed to choose between like their doula and their partner? And how dare you tell a partner, well, you know, you can't be in for the birth of your child? I mean, it's insane how, and like Kellee is saying, this is for everybody. So white folks were impacted just as much as Black folks. It was just an insane type thing. Then you have now, you know, we're still dealing with a lot of this pandemic stuff. And, you know, we still have issues of women who are pregnant and they come in to have their child. They don't have care for their older child. And, you know, you would think, okay, I understand the nursing staff does not have time to watch your child, but calling CPS is not the answer. Please, hello, no, that's not the answer. You can call, like, I can probably think of 50 people I would call before I would call CPS on this mother, especially she's coming through the ER and saying, you know, I'm having some signs of, I think, postpartum depression and I need help. So you call CPS? Like, really, people? The criminalizing of Black women is just staggering. I mean, I have no other way to say it. It makes me laugh, but it's not funny, because back in the day, we could birth white people's babies. We could feed white people's babies from our chests. We could take care of white people's babies, but now we're not good enough to have babies, feed babies, or take care of babies. So, like, there's a disconnect here. So we're only good enough to take care of white babies, but not Black babies. What is that?
Dorothy Roberts,
No,
Killing the Black Body, read it.
exactly.
Read all her books.
But it's this notion of, you're less than, you're unqualified for. And it's sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's just not even subtle, but it's still this, somebody, I just read something today, like telling a woman, you can't have a natural birth. I was like, why is that? Like, if you leave her alone, she gonna have a natural birth. So why are you telling her she can't do this? This notion of somehow there is always the pathologizing of Black women. There's always something wrong with us. And I've yet to figure out what that is, except for when they're raping us, having us had a baby. I don't understand that, but the pathology, and it's persisted. You could say some of the things I'm hearing even now. I was telling my mom, and she's like, oh, they used to say that when I was having you kids, and I'm 56. So, like, long time ago. And they're still saying these things. And Black women can't do, and they just don't take care of themselves. And, we do, but it's like I said, that blink of the eye, you've made your decision, and there we go. But the sad thing to me is we are still playing out the same stories and having the same conversations 100 years, 200 years later.
I think the part for this is, and what we've seen, right? We've seen folks that have lost babies, and that, things that people go through. I think of 3 off the top of my head, and it's scary, but I really feel like there's something to it being such a individual thing. I think is not good, right? I think the more that we're connected to other folks, and that we're with each other, the more protected we are. And I think that's really a big piece of why midwifery and birth companions or doulas are so important. It's because you're not by yourself, and it's not something that's happening to you. You have somebody there that can tell you, that can support you, and like give you a second, right? Like a lot of times, and we're just thinking about hospital births, right? You don't have time to really make a decision, and most of the time when you're having a baby, if it comes to you or the baby, we're like, take the baby, get the baby, right? That's and thinking about sort of the pathology that we don't take care of ourselves. It's like we're pathologized not to, though, right? Like we're told not to take care of everyone else, right? And so that's why I think pregnancy is such an important and powerful and transformational time, because that is at least the point where we're like, I have to, right? I have to, and we do it. And that's why it's so unfair to blame, Black women and for the health outcomes, right? It doesn't work. It's outside of this sort of public health framework, right? It has to be within sort of the ecological, social frameworks. We have to think about ourselves as connected to this larger thing. Otherwise, we can't be by ourselves, I don't think. And
But that's
for
always been the
for
way.
me, that it is, but that's what they do. I mean, it is a personal thing. I think it's what you said in the beginning, Darlene, right? It's like, it's about privacy, but it's also about, it's about being surveilled also, right? Who gets to do
Well,
those
but
things?
it comes back to, I mean, when you talk about the historical, it comes back
Yeah.
to when they brought slaves across the ocean and they realized that maybe one or two spoke the same language. First thing they did was
Separate them.
separate them out, divide and conquer. We know that we are, for lack of a better word, a more tribal, collective type of people. When you're having a baby, everybody was in the house, people bringing food, and someone's watching the baby, somebody else is doing something else. That's how we birthed, and that's how we survived. I mean, even way out on a plantation, somebody was having a baby, she was having trouble. The other women came and did her work so she could go home, so she could be home. And it's systematically, nope, nope, nope. Best place for a woman to have a baby is in the hospital. We know that's not the truth. That's
On her back at that.
On her back
right?
with her legs up. We know that is not the truth.
And it's structured that way for the doctors to have an easier time.
For the doctor's comfort. I have had clients, we've had her and she's like going, she's in the shower and she's like, and she's just about to deliver and like crowning the whole thing. And the doctor will come in, you got to get her on the bed. And I'm like, well, why can't you just, all it would take was for them to squat. And it's like, I mean, the look of like, you think I'm going to bend the knee to that? I mean, it's insane, but it's the whole notion of this is not about her, it's about me. It's not about her comfort and what's going to work well for her and the baby. It's about me. And if having family and everything in home and food and all that stuff would be better, no, it's really about me. And that's where we are. And if that's going to make her thrive, by all means, kill that. I mean, because at the end of the day, if we're going to have thriving Black communities, oh, hell no.
My birthday experience, they wouldn't give me the birthing bar. I was like, with you and my youngest, I was trying to get it, and we knew they had one, and they wouldn't. Yeah, they wouldn't do it, and I think too, like just going back to reproductive justice and how that framework I think is really helpful, is because no one. I mostly know like women identified folks that care about this, or birthing people really, that really care about this. And it's sort of outside, of these larger organizing movement sort of spaces, right? It's not the way we talk about, or it is super aligned with how we think about sort of like state violence and things like that. But it's not like, the police brutality movement, right? How people, you know what I'm saying? And I think that it's directly connected, right? Yeah. And I wish that there were ways, and I know that I know folks are working on making those connections, now. But I think that's a piece of what's missing, right? Is the reproductive justice sort of framework to everything that that we're looking at, right? Because if we were really working from that framework, it wouldn't really be a question around how we fund police departments, right? I got my T-shirt on from grassroots leadership. It says fund community, not policing, because we have these inflated police department budgets, right? When we know that the root causes that policing is trying to address are the same issues that impact reproductive health and reproductive justice, right? So, you know, it's not like they don't know what to do, you know, in either situation, right? Even with our health, even around just thinking about having healthy babies and healthy birthing people, you know, it's not like they don't understand what to do. It's about having this medical model, making money, who we sacrifice, who's virtuous, who's valuable, and who is not, right? Straight up. And if we wanted to fix it, we would.
Oh, in a minute, like, boom.
So let's see. I have to have
something there.
I was reading, I thought I saw a question. I'm actually going to come back to that question because we're running out of time and we're already touching on it. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about like who's doing what to solve the issue, you know, and y'all have said so many like flash words for me. So, you know, we talked about the allostatic load. We've talked about community. Darlene, you're talking about, you know, support and, you know, people and communities being around a birthing person. You're talking about legacies of care work, right? You know what I'm saying? Kellee, you were talking about how being isolated and thinking about kind of racism induced stress and kind of the ways in which we loved on birthing people, you know? So I'm curious, like, can you bring all these pieces together for me? Like, how are folks working to address this issue? Who's doing the work? What does it look like? I mean, Darlene, you talked about the midwifery model of care. Like, what is that even about? Like, how is that addressing the issue? Like, can we kind of dig a little bit deeper into people's approaches, these community-based approaches in particular to like addressing what's happening?
You know, back in the day, they talked about birth work was women's work. You know, I mean, men wanted no part of it. They were like, you know, let me know when the baby's here. They were out in the field. They were drinking a beer. They were doing whatever. And then somewhere, you know, in Europe, there were some guys who were kind of like, hey, I could do this. And, you know, women were like, no. And then, you know, they started going to school and they started learning their techniques and their surgeries and, oh, this is so much better and I can make it pain free for you. And this still not for us, but you know, this whole notion of the again, it's really coming back to control, policing, you know, dominating the female body. And it was like, we can make it not hurt. We can tell you exactly when you're going to have this baby. We can do all these things. And women in there, whatever, like, oh, well, that sounds pretty good. Gave it over. Well, Black women weren't giving it over. So they had to kind of like beat out the granny midwives because they were like, nah, that, because they knew like that is not good for us. My great grandmother was a granny midwife and they were telling her she had to do all this training and stuff. And my cousin has like a journal of hers, like, these people haven't had any babies. I've been birthing babies since, you know, for 30 years and they don't know anything. And they were trying to force her to take some sort of class or anything, which ended up that the women, Black women, were basically cleaning up the hospital. They weren't attending women, but it was the whole notion of, again, we have to regulate these bodies. And the midwives model of care basically, well, initially it states that, you know, a woman's body kind of knows what it's doing. We're just here to kind of witness it that's kind of the quick and dirty. But midwives, doulas, birth attendants, family, we're witnessing this happening. We're not doing anything to it. We're here to support mom, to feed her, to make sure she has water, to make sure she's comfortable as she does this thing that she's going to do anyway. We don't need to be in there like, we need to speed it up, we need to augment labor, we're gonna, none of that. We're just gonna let that happen. Now, of course, you have OBs who are like, well, if we don't do that, that placenta's degenerating, and look at all the women that died, and look at the women who are still dying. They're still dying. And I don't, maybe it's a hybrid of both, maybe they're, but it really still comes back to, we are going to regulate a woman's body. We're going to regulate when that child comes. We're going to regulate how it comes. We're going to regulate how fast it is. And I'm going to take charge of it. And like Kellee says, because it makes money. And the baby goes to the NICU, that makes some money too. And mom has to have all these procedures. It became a money-making thing, something that was once women's work, and women weren't paid for that. Once you always know the value of things, and you hear people, family values, when something's true, because when they start charging for it and men start getting money, then it gets value. Before that,
Yeah.
but it's really this it's coming. The midwife's model of care now is about kind of trying to step back and allow birthing people to just do what they're going to do, to allow their bodies to do that which it's going to do anyway. I have moms who are like, oh my God, I don't know if I can do this. Oh, what am I going to do? Like, believe you me, the baby's not going to get stuck. If the baby's in, it's coming out one way or another. That child is coming out. Now, you can fight it and it won't be very pretty, or you can try and relax and let it work its way out. But when it became commoditized, or became a commodity, then it was like, oh, well, we can do this and we can do that and we can do this and we can do that. And that's even the thing now, OBs trying to discredit midwives, and they're dirty and they don't know anything. And they know a lot. They just don't know all the crap, which in a lot of ways is not. It's useful at times, but for like the vast majority is not necessary.
We're one of the few places that does that though too, and in places where they have better outcomes. You see a midwife first, unless you're high risk, then you see the surgeon. And it's because I don't know that it's because they're worried about outcomes. I think it's because it's just the model, right? It's just how they do it.
Well, most countries have national health service. It's not about the money.
Right.
A birth is a birth is a birth. You getting this much money. Here,
right.
It's like, well, if I'm this type of OB, if I work in this,
if I can do an episiotomy, if I can give this medication
for that, exactly. Other places, it's like a birth is this much. Right. I don't care if you're Jack, Joe, or Janie, you getting this much, and that takes the whole thing out of it. So, they're happy to have midwives do it, and doctors don't want to be up all night. Oh, is this taking too long? And
so
sometimes.
The thing that keeps coming up for me though, I think that what we're bringing up is really important. We're talking about like challenging the like hyper medicalization of birth. We see how that has come about, throughout history, and like the burgeoning of the, OB/GYN like field and all of that. But there's something else happening. Like, I want you guys to talk about that for me. Like, so I keep thinking about the study that came out maybe a year or two ago about better outcomes when Black birthing people were seen by Black physicians, right? Or can we talk a little bit about like this growing movement of like Black doulas and Black midwives? Like, I think that there's the hyper medicalization of birth that's happening, but then there's something else happening as well. And people are, there's a reason why people are fighting for midwives to be covered by Medicaid. There's a reason why people are fighting for Black doulas in particular to be able to be paid. Like, what is that? Like, what is that getting to in terms of like addressing these outcomes? Like, what's happening with that? Why is that even important?
I think it's important, but I think it's important plus, right? Like, I don't think that you can just have that and things will be better by itself, because people got to go home after they leave. And if we're still in a reproductive justice frame, right, then we want people when they go home to have stepped into their power through this transformative experience of being pregnant and birthing, to be able to support someone else or be working in their community to make sure others have access to the same sort of experiences. And what does that mean? And how do you do that? Because I think, again, if we're like, oh, let's just implement this midwifery model of care, boom, we're good. That's not the point, right? Or, oh, we pay black doulas, and you get, I mean, you've heard me talk about like Afro bougie spaces where people can afford that stuff and it's all good. Like, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, I think, or what I would like to see, and what folks that I work with to see, is it be a part of a movement, right? And that includes organizing. That means doing work in solidarity with folks, you know, even if you're not a pregnant person or a birthing person, right? That means building consciousness around this. It means, you know, pushing together and seeing the connections from all of these stories and experiences, and having this shared analysis of what we want to see, right? Because we know what we don't want. Right. But what do we want? That's the hard part.
The radical imagination.
Well, I think too, though, to Kelly's point, there's that. And to answer your question, Eshe, it's why are we fighting for Black doulas? Why are we saying the midwives model of care? And for me, it comes back to that autonomy. We're trying, and just simple human dignity. I mean, really, sometimes in the hospitals, I'm in there with the mom, and, you know, they're trying to get at her chest, they're pulling at this. And I mean, she's birthing, and yes, it is a thing, but, you know, she's naked. Okay, once the baby comes out, and I'm trying to like put a blanket on, I mean, like, let's restore some dignity to things. You know, even with, why should we pay doulas? Because doulas work damn hard and they deserve a living freaking wage. It's like, I'm like, when I look at physicians, even not even midwives, like, you come in that room, if you're in there 30 minutes and you're going to bill for like hundreds of dollars and you have done nothing, and you have maybe even created harm. I mean, I think if we can, there's a whole lot of talk now around value-based payments. And I think it's going to get really interesting if they can actually fight it, because the AMA is fighting this nonsense tooth and nail. I want value-based payments, because value-based payments will bring up, like Kellee said, well, how many C-sections you do in a month? How many people had these near misses? How many women are, you know, complaining about, you know, you cut when they asked you not to cut, and this and that. So they're trying to squelch that, something fierce. But if we ever got back to value-based payments, where you get paid based on the value that you bring, it's not enough that you just got mother and baby here and they didn't die. I mean,
but that's
them. That's the bar. Like,
yeah,
what, you got the baby? Well, you know, the baby's in the NICU, and I'm like still trying to recover 6 months later. That's not a win. That's
and the
not
NICU nurse is judging you how you come in there and
how
see
you
your
come in,
baby,
or that you can't come in because you have to work a 9 to 5. That you don't come and spend all day at the bedside with your baby. Not that you don't want to, but if you do that, you're gonna have to live in that room with the baby. You know, so but the movements and things that you're seeing or that you're asking about, each share the very things that Kelly's talking about organizing around. Because if a person is going to be able to have the children that they want and to parent the children that they have, we have to have these equitable things, housing, food, equitable care, like high quality care. And these are and we know the healthcare system can't provide that. That's the other thing. You know, you can talk about Afro bougie, whatever, but I just, if when I go into a room, even when I was training, I trained at Duke and I was PA, and I would go in a room and I would see people's faces like, oh my God. And I was like, hey, like behind the attending, like, because there was just this point of like, oh my God, there's someone who actually sees me as I am, who's not like, this is case number 345, and you're just a case. You're a C-section that happened, or you're a hysterectomy, or you don't have a name, you don't even really have a gender, you're just a case. And that's, when we talk about midwives model of care and more Black doulas, more Black people, because even you can be as bougie as you want. You go in that room and you see your mama, you see your sister, you see a cousin, you may see your old girlfriend, whatever, but you see people that you know in that woman. And unless you're just like a brick, you can't act crazy. It like something in you will not allow you, we hope, for most people.
Right. I was gonna say
for most people, because there are a few that I'm like,
because again, if you when you bring money into something, right, and if it's a class thing, and the people who have access, oh well, that's backwards to go into the hospital and have a C-section, and I'm breastfeeding right now it's that, right,
now
it's this chic. There's this, right. And so when you're attached to that, and we do it because we have internalized this stuff.
Yes,
we have internalized it. What I'm putting forward is that I think people have to have an analysis of these systems, and it can't be individuals. We cannot be working at this as individuals. No, we have to be clear. That's the thing I think with reproductive justice frame, is that it's rights-based. But honestly, I think it's just really like this. We should think about it like this concept that really is a part of everything, right? It's like
collective. It's a collective work.
It is, but what I see happening, and it's what happens in white spaces too, is that it gets super individualized, and you get pulled away from your folks. I mean, think about when we've had our littles. It usually brings us together, right? It brings folks together, and but when there's also the piece too, right, where there can be a lot of shame, associated with it too, depending on your class or who you are, right? And so
you're married or not,
right, that part. I had an older Black woman tell me one time when Esha was doing a presentation, because I said she was a single mom, right? Or were you pregnant, Esha? Do you remember that?
I do remember. I don't know if I was pregnant, but I remember you might have just said I was a single mom, and she was like, she said, don't say nothing.
Don't out her, right? Like, don't out her. It was, it was some stuff. And I think Black women need to be having these conversations with each other, because that class stuff ain't gonna save us. If Serena Williams out here having these types of experiences, then, and that was like,
for the rest of us.
That was slight. I mean, they're still shackling people in Texas that are in pretrial having babies. They still, I mean, this stuff is still happening to folks. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, really, if we want this to change, I think we have to be clear with each other and move forward. And it can't be just like the midwifery model of care is dope. I'm not gonna act like it's not. Like, it's not amazing and life-changing and helps outcomes. And I'm not gonna act like birth support isn't great, but why are we doing it, right? What are we trying to build that's different, that doesn't recreate the same stuff? Because they gotta go home. People gotta go back out into the world. So how are we changing that so that baby boy don't get the police don't come take the kid, right? Or CPS don't get called in a few weeks, right? All of that. Sorry.
No, that was
That's it.
perfect. I think you really wrapped it up really well. I think like the point of everything that we've been talking about. I mean, we only have like 9 minutes. I would love if you have any closing thoughts. I'm trying to make sure, folks, if you have questions. I know there was one question, but if I missed it, I'm trying to scroll through. You could drop it in the chat one more time. If there's something you have a burning question you want to ask our panelists, we could address that now, or we could just end on that note since Kellee want to drop the mic like that.
She asked that question about how, because some people feel like it's anti-Black family, that reproductive
I'm
justice
trying to find it. Yeah.
is
Yeah, I was just
anti-Black
looking at that.
family. Yeah, that's a part of the thing that I brought up that day when that woman said that stuff to you. Do you remember that? What's the name of the report? Where it basically blamed black moms and
the Moynihan report.
The Moynihan report, right? I think it's connected. It's connected to that, right? Like this, the most unsafe place for a Black baby is in a Black woman's womb, Black mother's womb, right? Like, nah, no, that's right. And so I think that's why I said what I said before, because I feel like there's such different lenses that people use to understand it. And it's like, if you care about this, you have to understand like why abortion is important, why it's necessary, why it needs to be there, and whether you agree with it or not, or you would do it or not, but it needs to be there. It's the same as forcing people to have babies. We went from breeding people, right? Black people, to, forced sterilization.
Yeah.
Right? And everything in between. And so what, these things are directly tied to labor and production. Are you producing? That's why we treat elders the way we do in this country. Right? So that's what I think is like, it is a myth, Kiana. I think you're right. That but it's something that a lot of us buy because of our connection to the Black church and and Christianity, right?
Anti-Christian.
But we know, I think in ourselves, like maybe it's not the right answer for everyone, right? But it has to be a part of this spectrum. You know what I mean? It's care, it's medical care is what it is. It's healthcare. And, people need to be able to decide, when they do it and when they don't. And when they don't do it, it should be safe and healthy. And when they do it, it should be safe and healthy too.
Right.
Like, I shouldn't have to worry about my baby, my baby or your baby. That's the key too, right? Like, I need to be concerned about your baby and my baby. That's not really the culture. It's like we mind our business, we stay in, and we can't afford to continue like that.
Yeah. Well, I think that was the only other question in the chat. So I guess we'll stop there. I want to thank y'all, my people from back home. Darlene, you're not in Texas no more, but I appreciate having this conversation. I hope the folks that were listening, enjoyed it and got something out of it. And that's it.
Show me here. And no shade to Black bougie folks. I'm trying to be one. Okay. So I'm just being real. It's not fun being broke. It's not fun being poor. So I stay working. Straight up. I'm just saying, right? Like, it's this like mentality, that comes along with that thinking, being confused about where you sit in the arrangement, right?
Yeah. No, I don't know.
We can't afford to be confused about that. Y'all know who I'm talking about. Y'all done seen them. Y'all done met them. You know, I love you, Eshe. It was good to be with you, Ms. Darlene. It was nice to meet you, Katie. And thank everyone that came.
I know. Thank you all for spending an evening with us while we got to like play with each other and hang out with friends. So that
Yes, Miss Darlene looking so beautiful.
Yeah.
I wish I would have been so cute. It's dark over here where I'm at.
No, I was looking tough. I was like, I can't get on there and be shaming Eshe with her.
Cassandra, oh my goodness.
Let me fix myself.
You look good.
Everybody looks good. Y'all both look beautiful.
You look fly too, Eshe. I see your fresh twist.
She got her locks going.
All right, y'all.
All right.
Thank you, everyone here. Darlene, Kellee, Eshe. Wow. I mean, truly such a riveting, but also just, I loved how nuanced and complex and holistic so much of what you had to say was. And I think that that is missing in too many conversations that we have right now. So I very much appreciate Eshe for helping coordinate this, SWS for helping contribute to the funding of tonight's dialogue. And of course, Darlene and Kellee, thank you so, so much for your candor, your wit, your insight, your passion, your wisdom, and everything else that you contributed tonight. I think that judging from the comments, it was impactful, and we're looking forward to posting this on social media in the coming days. But thank you so much for your time this evening. And we really, really appreciate all the work that you do, not just tonight, but of course, all the other days that you're doing this work with some gratitude perhaps, but certainly not enough. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Okay, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.